The autumn rain fell softly over Greenwood Bay, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of amber light. Sienna Hayes stood outside the wrought iron gates of the Vance estate, clutching a leather portfolio against her chest, as if it could shield her from the uncertainty ahead. The mansion before her rose like a monument to solitude, all glass and steel perched on the edge of the water, where waves whispered secrets to the shore. She had driven 3 hours for this interview, leaving behind her cramped apartment and the pile of overdue bills that haunted her kitchen table. Art therapy positions were rare, and this one promised a salary that could change everything. Still, something about the listing had felt strange. Private care for a single client, complete discretion required. No questions about the past. The gate buzzed open before she could press the intercom. A voice crackled through the speaker, mechanical and distant. "Miss Hayes, please proceed to the main entrance." The driveway curved through gardens that looked meticulously maintained, yet somehow empty, as if no one had walked among the roses in years. When she reached the front door, it opened silently, revealing a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a neat bun. "I'm Grace, the house manager," the woman said, extending her hand. "He's waiting for you in the conservatory. Follow me, please." They walked through hallways lined with abstract paintings, each one more haunting than the last. Sienna recognized the style immediately. These were the works of Jonathan Vance, the artist who had vanished from the public eye a decade ago after a scandal that rocked the art world. She had studied his technique in college, fascinated by the way he captured loneliness in bold strokes of color. "Is Mr. Vance related to the artist?" Sienna asked. Grace paused, her expression unreadable. "He prefers not to discuss family matters. You'll understand soon enough." The conservatory stretched before them, a cathedral of glass overlooking the bay. Rain drummed against the roof in a rhythm that felt almost musical. In the center of the room stood a man with his back to them, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the water. "Mr. Vance, Miss Hayes has arrived," Grace announced softly before retreating. He turned slowly, and Sienna felt her breath catch. Julian Vance was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, but there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of wealth so old it no longer needed to announce itself. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low and careful. "I know the position is unusual." "That's one word for it," Sienna replied, trying to keep her tone professional. "Your listing mentioned art therapy, but it didn't specify what kind of treatment you're seeking." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Direct, I appreciate that." He gestured to a pair of chairs arranged near the windows. As they sat, Sienna noticed the faint tremor in his left hand, quickly hidden as he folded his arms. 3 years ago, I was in an accident," Julian began, his gaze fixed on the rain beyond the glass. "A car crash that took my father and left me with nerve damage. The doctors fixed what they could, but some things don't heal the way they should." "I'm sorry," Sienna said quietly. "Everyone is." His tone held no bitterness, only exhaustion. "But sympathy doesn't change reality. I've tried traditional therapy, medication, specialists from around the world. Nothing works because the problem isn't just physical." He stood and walked to a covered easel in the corner. With his right hand, he pulled away the cloth, revealing a canvas covered in chaotic brushstrokes, fragments of images that never quite formed. "My father was Jonathan Vance. Perhaps you've heard of him." Sienna's heart skipped. "The artist who disappeared." "He didn't disappear. He destroyed himself." Julian's jaw tightened. After the scandal, after they accused him of stealing another artist's work, he couldn't paint anymore. The shame consumed him. "The night of the accident, we were arguing about it. I was driving. He grabbed the wheel. The silence that followed was heavy with unsaid things." Sienna watched as Julian traced the edge of the canvas with his fingertips, his damaged hand struggling to stay steady. "I need someone who understands that art isn't just about creating," he continued. "It's about finding yourself in the chaos. I need to learn how to hold a brush again, not because I want to paint, but because it's the only language I have left for everything I can't say. Sienna rose and approached the canvas, studying the fractured images. She saw pain there, yes, but also something else. A desperate reaching toward light. Why me? She asked. My credentials are solid, but there are therapists with far more experience. Julian met her eyes for the first time, really looked at her, and she felt something shift in the air between them. Because your application essay mentioned that you started art therapy after losing someone. You wrote that painting taught you the difference between fixing something and learning to live with its cracks. He paused. I don't need someone who thinks they can fix me. I need someone who knows that broken things can still be beautiful. The rain intensified, turning the windows into waterfalls of light. Sienna felt her professional resolve wavering under the weight of his honesty. The position includes room and board, Julian added. You'll have your own studio space, access to any materials you need. The contract is for 6 months, but you can leave any time if you feel uncomfortable. And what makes you think I'll stay? She asked. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face. Because you're still standing here, asking questions instead of running. She thought of her apartment, her debts, the life she had been barely surviving rather than living. But more than that, she thought of the man before her, surrounded by beauty, yet drowning in solitude. When do I start? Sienna heard herself say. Tomorrow, if you're ready. As Grace appeared to show her to the guest wing, Sienna glanced back. Julian had returned to the window, his silhouette dark against the silver rain. She didn't know then that accepting this job would unravel everything she thought she knew about her own past. She didn't know that the accident that destroyed him was connected to the tragedy that had shaped her. All she knew was that something in his brokenness called to something in hers, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she needed to answer. The morning light arrived pale and hesitant, filtering through the sheer curtains of Sienna's new room. She woke to the sound of waves against the rocks below and the distant cry of seabirds. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned with the weight of decision. She had agreed to stay in this beautiful prison, to help a man she barely knew find his way back to something he had lost. After dressing in comfortable clothes, she followed the scent of coffee to the kitchen, where Grace was preparing breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had perfected solitude into routine. He's already in the studio, Grace said without preamble, pouring Sienna a cup. 3rd floor east wing. He starts early when he can't sleep, which is most nights. Sienna accepted the coffee gratefully. Has he always been like this? Grace's expression softened with something like maternal concern. Before the accident, Julian was different. He laughed more, traveled constantly, lived loudly. The crash didn't just damage his hand. It silenced something essential in him. The studio was flooded with natural light from skylights that turned the space into a sanctuary of shadows and illumination. Julian stood before a blank canvas, a brush held awkwardly in his left hand. His right hand, the damaged one, hung at his side, fingers curling and uncurling in a rhythm that spoke of frustration. You don't have to announce yourself, he said without turning. I can feel when someone enters my space. That must make privacy difficult, Sienna replied, setting down her bag. Privacy and loneliness are different things. I have plenty of both. She approached slowly, observing the way he gripped the brush too tightly, the tension radiating through his shoulders. When was the last time you actually painted something? 2 years? 4 months? 16 days? The precision of his answer revealed how much he had been counting. I pick up the brush almost every morning. Nothing comes. Maybe you're trying too hard to control it, Sienna suggested. Art therapy isn't about perfection. It's about permission. He finally looked at her, curiosity flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Permission for what? To fail spectacularly. Before he could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the hallway. A teenage girl burst through the door, her dark curls wild around her face, eyes bright with an energy that seemed at odds with the subdued atmosphere of the estate. Julian, you promised we'd go to the mainland today for my art supplies, and you're hiding up here again, she said, then noticed Sienna. Oh, you're the new therapist. Nora, Julian's voice carried a warning, but also affection. This is Sienna Hayes. Sienna, my sister Nora. She's supposed to be at school right now. Online classes are boring, and Mrs. Chen gives terrible assignments, Nora replied, flopping into a chair with teenage grace. She studied Sienna with unabashed interest. Are you going to fix him? Nora, Julian said again, more firmly. What? Everyone else tried and failed. I'm just being honest. She turned to Sienna. He won't tell you this, but he needs more than art therapy. He needs to stop punishing himself for something that wasn't entirely his fault. The air in the room changed, grew heavier. Julian's jaw tightened, and Sienna saw his damaged hand begin to shake more violently. That's enough, he said quietly. But Nora pressed on, her youth making her either brave or reckless. Dad grabbed the wheel, Julian. The investigation proved it. You weren't drinking. You weren't speeding. He caused the crash because he couldn't live with his shame anymore. I said enough. Julian's voice cracked like thunder, and for the first time, Sienna saw real anger flash across his features. Go to your room. Nora stood, tears suddenly bright in her eyes. You're not the only one who lost him, you know. But at least I'm trying to live. She left in a whirlwind of hurt feelings and slammed doors. The silence that remained felt like the aftermath of a storm. Sienna waited, giving him space to collect himself. Julian turned back to the canvas, his whole body rigid with emotion he refused to release. I should apologize for that, he said eventually. She loves you, Sienna replied. Sometimes love speaks in accusations when gentleness gets ignored. You sound like you know something about complicated families. My mother died in a hospital when I was 17. Medical error during a routine surgery. For years I blamed the doctors, the system, everyone but the universe for being randomly cruel. Sienna moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his frustration. It took a long time to understand that blame is just grief with nowhere else to go. Julian's eyes met hers, and she saw recognition there, the kind that happens when two people who have survived similar storms find each other in the aftermath. The driver who hit us was texting, he said quietly. They crossed into our lane. My father panicked and grabbed the wheel trying to correct. We spun into the guardrail. He died on impact. I woke up 3 days later with a hand that no longer obeyed me and a sister who suddenly had no parents. That's not your fault, Sienna said, isn't it? If I hadn't insisted we drive that night, if I had listened when he said he was tired, if I had been faster to react. If, Sienna echoed. Those are the words that keep us trapped in the past. What if instead you asked different questions? What if the point isn't to go back but to find a way forward? He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. You're different from the others. They treated me like a problem to solve. You talk to me like I'm still a person. That's because you are, she said simply. Without thinking, she reached out and gently took his damaged hand. He flinched but didn't pull away. She could feel the tremor, the way his muscles fought against themselves. May I? She asked. He nodded, silent. Slowly, carefully, she guided his hand to the canvas, placing the brush between his fingers. His grip was weak, uncertain, but she held her hand over his, steadying the motion. Don't think, she whispered. Just feel. Together they made a single stroke across the white surface. It was messy, imperfect, a slash of blue that meant nothing and everything. But it was movement. It was beginning. Julian's breath caught, and when she looked up, she saw moisture gathering at the corners of his eyes. I forgot what this felt like, he said, his voice barely audible. The simple act of making a mark and having it matter. They stood there, hands still touching, the brush trembling between them. Sienna felt something dangerous stirring in her chest, a connection that went beyond professional boundaries. She should step away, maintain distance, but his vulnerability held her in place like gravity. "Thank you," Julian said, and the words carried more weight than gratitude. They carried hope. The moment broke when Grace appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Vance, your lawyer is on the phone about the foundation business." Julian released a long breath and carefully set down the brush. "I should take that. Will you be here when I return?" "Where else would I go?" Sienna asked, trying to lighten the heaviness between them. After he left, she stood alone in the studio, staring at the single blue line they had created together. Something about this place, this man, felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. It nagged at her like a forgotten melody. That afternoon, while Julian was occupied with business calls, Sienna explored the mansion. She found herself drawn to a locked room on the second floor, its door marked with a small brass plate that read, "Memorial." Grace found her there, staring at the locked door. "That was Mr. Vance's father's study," Grace explained. "Julian hasn't opened it since the funeral. He says he's not ready to face what's inside." "What is inside?" Sienna asked. Grace hesitated, then said, "The truth about why his father really grabbed that wheel. The evidence that might change everything Julian believes about that night." Before Sienna could ask more, her phone buzzed with a reminder. The date caught her eye. November 15th. 3 years ago today, her mother had died during what should have been a simple procedure at Mercy General Hospital, the same hospital where Julian's father had been pronounced dead after the crash, the same night. Coincidence, she told herself. But her hands began to shake as she pulled up old news articles on her phone, searching for details she had tried to forget. The crash happened at 8:47 in the evening. Her mother's surgery had been scheduled for 8:30. Her heart hammered as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began to fall into place. She thought of Julian's words about medical errors, about blame being grief with nowhere to go. What if their tragedies were connected by more than just timing and location? What if the reason Julian's hand trembled had something to do with the reason her mother never came home? The discovery sat in Sienna's chest like a stone, heavy and cold. She spent the rest of the day moving through the mansion like a ghost, her mind racing through possibilities she wasn't ready to face. Every time she saw Julian, guilt twisted inside her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was beginning to care for him, and caring made the truth more dangerous. That evening, she found him in the conservatory again, standing where they had first met. The sun was setting over the bay, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. He looked peaceful for the first time since she had arrived, his shoulders relaxed, his damaged hand resting against the glass without shame. "I spoke with Nora," he said without turning. "She apologized for this morning. I apologized for shutting her out. Small progress, but progress nonetheless." Sienna wanted to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She thought of her mother's smile, the way she used to hum while painting in their tiny apartment. She thought of the last conversation they had before the surgery, her mother reassuring her that everything would be fine, that she would be home in time for dinner. "Sienna," Julian turned, concern crossing his features. "Are you all right? You look pale. I need to ask you something," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "About the night of the accident. What hospital did they take you to?" His brow furrowed. "Mercy General. Why does that matter?" Her worst fear confirmed. "What time did the crash happen?" "Around 8:45. The police report was specific." He moved closer, studying her face. "What's going on?" Sienna closed her eyes, gathering courage. When she opened them again, she met his gaze directly. "My mother died that same night, at that same hospital. Her surgery started at 8:30. Something went wrong, and they couldn't save her." The color drained from Julian's face. "No, that's impossible. I thought so too, until I checked the records this afternoon." Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, showing him the articles she had found. "Your accident caused a mass casualty event. Every available doctor was called to the emergency department. including the surgeon who was supposed to be monitoring my mother's procedure. Julian stumbled backward as if she had struck him. Dr. Patterson left her? You know the name? Sienna's voice cracked. He was the head of trauma. He treated me that night, saved my life. Julian's words came out broken, disbelieving. He told me later that he had to make an impossible choice. Multiple critical patients from the crash, not enough surgeons. He didn't tell me someone died because he chose us. The weight of it hung between them. 3 years of grief and guilt suddenly given shape and connection. Sienna felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she understood everything. There's more, isn't there? She asked. Grace mentioned evidence in your father's study. Something about why he really grabbed the wheel. Julian pressed his palms against his eyes, his breathing ragged. I can't do this right now. Yes, you can, Sienna said, moving closer despite every instinct telling her to run. Because we're already in this, Julian. Our pain is connected whether we want it to be or not. The only way forward is through the truth. He looked at her then. Really looked. And she saw the exact moment he made his decision. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the staircase. She followed him through hallways that seemed darker now, more oppressive, until they reached the locked door with the brass plate. Julian's hand shook violently as he produced a key from his pocket. It took 3 attempts before he could fit it into the lock. When the door finally opened, stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of old paper and cedar. The study was frozen in time. Papers still scattered across the desk, a coffee cup with long-dried residue, paintings leaning against every wall. But what caught Sienna's attention was the laptop sitting open on the desk, its screen dark but present, like a sleeping oracle waiting to reveal its secrets. Julian moved to the desk with the heaviness of a man approaching his own execution. He pressed the power button, and miraculously, the computer hummed to life. The police returned his belongings 6 months after the funeral. He said quietly. I couldn't look at them then. I still can't, not really. But Nora told me once that she opened the laptop. She said there was an email, something important. I didn't want to know. The screen illuminated, showing a desktop cluttered with folders. Julian clicked on the email application, and there, marked as unread, was a message with the subject line. Final confession. His finger hovered over the mouse, frozen. Would you like me to open it? Sienna asked gently. He nodded, unable to speak. She leaned over his shoulder and clicked. The email opened, revealing words that would change everything. My dearest children, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and perhaps that is for the best. I have been a coward for too long, and cowardice has a way of destroying more than just the coward himself. Sienna continued reading aloud, her voice soft but steady. The accusations against me were true. I did copy another artist's work and pass it as my own. But what the world doesn't know is why. 20 years ago, I was commissioned to restore a collection of paintings for a private collector. Among them was a masterpiece by an unknown artist, someone who had died in obscurity. The work was breathtaking, revolutionary. I was supposed to preserve it, but instead, I photographed every detail and recreated it as my own. Julian made a sound like a wounded animal. Sienna placed her hand on his shoulder, grounding him as she continued. The guilt ate at me every day. Every award I received, every gallery showing, every moment of praise was a lie. When the truth came out, I told myself I was being punished justly. But the real punishment was watching my shame destroy our family. Julian, my brilliant son, taking on the burden of my failures. Nora, my sweet daughter, growing up in the shadow of scandal. The email continued, but Julian took over reading now, his voice breaking with each word. Tonight, I asked Julian to drive me to the coast. I told him I needed to clear my head, but the truth is I couldn't bear another day carrying this weight. When I saw the headlights of that other car crossing into our lane, I grabbed the wheel. I didn't want Julian hurt, but I wasn't strong enough to keep living. I'm sorry, my son. I'm so sorry. You deserved a father who was brave enough to face his mistakes. Instead, you got one who ran from them until the very end. Silence filled the study, broken only by the sound of Julian's ragged breathing. Sienna felt her own tears finally fall, but they weren't just for her mother anymore. They were for this broken man beside her, for the sister who had lost both parents, for all the ways tragedy ripples outward like stones thrown into still water. "He killed himself," Julian whispered. "He used me as the instrument. All this time I thought it was an accident, a moment of panic. But he chose it. He chose to leave us. He was sick," Sienna said firmly. "Depression, shame, whatever name you give it. He wasn't thinking clearly about what it would do to you. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human." Julian turned to her, his face wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. "Your mother died because my father couldn't handle his guilt. Because the crash he caused pulled doctors away from where they were needed. How can you even look at me?" "Because you're not your father," Sienna said, cupping his face in her hands. "Just like I'm not defined by my mother's death. We're people who had terrible things happen to us, but we're still here. We're still choosing to wake up every morning and try." "I don't know how to live with this," he admitted, his voice small and lost. "Neither do I," she confessed. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to figure it out alone." Something shifted between them then, a recognition deeper than shared trauma. It was the acknowledgement that two broken people could hold each other up without pretending the cracks didn't exist. Julian's good hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. "I'm terrified of this," he whispered. "Of you, of what you make me feel. Every person I've cared about has either left or been taken away." "I'm terrified too," Sienna admitted. "My mother was my whole world. After she died, I built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to let someone in. But you, Julian, you make me want to remember." They stood in that dusty study, surrounded by the ghost of a man who couldn't save himself, and chose something neither had planned. Julian leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When his lips met hers, it wasn't passionate or desperate. It was gentle, questioning, two people asking permission to be vulnerable together. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" "We start being honest," Sienna said. "With each other, with ourselves. We stop running from what happened and start living despite it." That sounds terrifying. It is. But so is spending the rest of our lives alone because we're afraid. A sound from the doorway made them turn. Nora stood there, tears streaming down her face, having heard everything. "You're not alone," she said, her voice fierce despite the tears. "Neither of you. We're a family now, broken and strange and nothing like what we planned. But we're here, and we're choosing to stay." Julian opened his arms, and his sister rushed into them, holding on tight. Sienna joined them, wrapping her arms around them both, feeling the rightness of it despite the impossibility. Later that night, after Nora had gone to bed and the house settled into silence, Sienna and Julian sat together in the conservatory. The bay stretched before them, dark and infinite. "I called the hospital earlier," Julian said quietly. "I spoke with Dr. Patterson. He remembered your mother, remembered the impossible choice he had to make. He's carried that guilt for 3 years. So have we all," Sienna replied. "Maybe it's time to let some of it go." Julian reached for her hand with his damaged one. It still trembled, but this time she felt him fighting to steady it, choosing connection over fear. "I want to try," he said. "Not just painting, but living. Really living. Will you stay and help me figure out how?" Sienna looked at their joined hands, at the man who had become so much more than an employer, at the life she could build if she was brave enough to choose it. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady, washing the glass walls clean. And in the conservatory, two people who had been drowning in separate griefs found their way to shore together. The broken things between them didn't magically heal. Julian's hand still shook. Sienna still woke, sometimes reaching for a mother who would never answer. But they learned to paint new pictures with the fragments they had left, creating something beautiful from the ruins of what they had lost. In the end, love didn't fix them, but it gave them a reason to believe that being broken wasn't the same as being beyond repair.